Welcome to one more video related to this module on elder and estate mediation. We decided that it might be helpful to just do a bit of an example of how you might organize yourself in a mediation involving multiple parties, which is quite common in these types of matters. So I'm going to bring up my systems map here for this family. I'll tell you a little bit about the background here and what my drawing all represents, at least for me, keeping in mind that when you do your own systems mapping, that it's for your own purposes to see what makes sense to you and help flag for yourself what things that you want to keep in mind in designing the process. So this is a situation involving Mabel, and Mabel is mom because it is Abel and Betty, the son and the daughter, who have come to me asking for mediation because they do not see things the same way with respect to mom and having care provided to her. So I've just made a note here that the dispute, as you know, is presenting itself is between Abel and Betty. Now, because this is about mom, and that's how they refer to mom, I'm actually creating an extra identity here, and I'm labeling them as son and daughter in addition to what their actual legal names are, because there's something here that in my mind around what these different labels might mean and represent with respect to power, with respect to perhaps some implicit bias when it comes to differences in gender. And these are things that just help me be curious about how this family system operates. Now, in my initial conversations, I've gathered some extra information here, and it turns out that there's also a dad in the picture. It's Mabel's husband. His name's Monty, and so a dad and mom, they have a relationship, though it's not presenting as there being a dispute per se. I have some curiosity around what dad, is thinking about the situation and what his relationship is like with mom. And in fact, I probably also have some interest in understanding dad's relationship with Betty, the daughter, as well as the son Abel. And I just don't have that drawn out on this particular map, but these are the things that would be going on in my mind. Now, I've also discovered that Abel, the son, has a wife, and so her name is Annie. Now, how she sort of fits, if I have mom kind of is the central figure here in this systems map, is that Annie relates to mom here as the daughter-in-law. So there may be something significant about her title within this family system. And here I have also discovered that Betty had a husband, but he's deceased. So this is just a way of noting that for myself. It may be that it's not going to be the least bit relevant, but it depends in part how long it's been since Betty's husband has deceased, how he fit within the family system when he was alive, and where Betty's at right now with respect to her grieving process. And if her husband's has passed away for a very long time ago, it doesn't necessarily mean that she's worked through her grieving process, but these are some of the things that I'm going to have an awareness on. Sometimes it's helpful, I might want to know what Betty's husband died from, because depending on what's happening here with mom and why it is that there's a difference of opinion with respect to providing care for mom, depending on what kind of illness perhaps she has or her circumstances, if that's in any way tied into what happened with Betty's husband, that might give me some additional information about potential underlying needs or interests or concerns that Betty might have. Now, Betty has a son. Her son's name is Frank, and he has this label within the family system of grandson. So how he interacts with his grandmother and his grandfather and his uncle and his aunt, in addition to his mom, these are things that I will also be interested interested in understanding. Now, Betty has come to mediation and has identified Frank as a support person for her. And this is not uncommon when you're dealing with multiple parties in this kind of a dispute for mediation, where there are some alignments or some additional people in the background that, though they don't come forward to say, yeah, I want to be part of the mediation, they're very influential in the background. And so as a mediator, I may want to leave open some chairs around our mediation table that make the invitation to have those other people participate. And so this is just some initial information that I may have gathered either from even just that initial phone call or having an initial conversation with Abel or with Betty or with both of them for that matter. And you can see there's not a ton of information there, but I've captured some things that have got my mind thinking and wondering and having some curiosity that is going to inform some of my hunches around what the issues and the interests might be. So I'm going to consider what kinds of meetings might be important to have. And though you might think, well, if it's Abel and Betty that are in dispute, wouldn't you just be doing an intake with each of them and then a meeting with the two of them? Well, that is an option. You might do it that way, but there may need to be a series of other meetings, and you will start to be thinking about this in your prepare phase, and it will come as a result of drawing out that relationship map, that family system as you're understanding it initially. So in this instance, I'm thinking to myself, I'd like to meet with Abel and Annie. So though Annie may very much be just a background person here, I also am aware that because of this relationship, that there may be something really important to Abel for Abel to have Annie participate at some point. And so why not invite Abel suggest to Abel that he can invite Annie for that initial meeting. Now you'll see Abel's name comes up here again a little bit later, because I'm not discounting the fact that just because I've met with Abel and Annie together doesn't mean that Abel shouldn't also have his own separate meeting. In this example, I'm not having a separate meeting with Annie because, as it turns out, after I've had this initial meeting with Abel and Annie, Annie does say, you know, I'm in the background here, I'm a support person, I certainly want to be included, but I do think that this is actually something that's between Abel and Betty, and that they are going to have to work that out between them. So I might make a process decision right on the front end about just meeting with Abel and then saying, well, would you like to have another meeting and bring Annie along? Or I might start off by saying, Abel, why don't you come and why don't you bring your wife, because I'm sure she has a perspective on the situation as well that may be helpful. So you'll assess that at the beginning based on what initial information that you have. And sometimes you don't have enough information to even know that there's an Annie in the background, or you know that there's an Annie in the background, but you really don't know which would be the best way to do it. So keep in mind that a fundamental foundational principle in mediation is honoring people's autonomy. So saying to Abel, hey, I'm happy to meet with you alone or meet with you and your wife together to start off with. What would you like to do? And then Abel will either say what he wants to do, or he might say he doesn't know. And then at that time, you'll make a decision based on what you think is appropriate in the circumstance. Next set of meetings, Betty and Frank, her son. So because Betty has initially identified Frank as somebody who's significant to this decision-making process, at least he's influencing her and her decision-making, or he's providing support to her. There's been something about how she's identified him as a significant part of this system. So I'm really wanting to get a sense of what's going on for Frank and his perspective. Whether I'm meeting with Abel and Annie first or Betty and Frank first really doesn't matter. These are these individual meetings, and sometimes that's more of a scheduling thing than it is well, you should go first and then you can come second. You'd be surprised at how people will interpret meaning where there is no intention though. So if either a person person, or if you're dealing with sort of camps of people, if anybody is feeling that somehow someone gets an upper hand because they meet with you first, clearly they don't really understand the role of the mediator and how it doesn't matter. Nobody can really influence you as a mediator, that somehow that's going to change the outcome of the decision-making process that they're in charge of. But that doesn't change the fact that some people, especially when trust has really been damaged, they become skeptical about all sorts of things, including, well, who did you meet with first? So yeah, I'd always try to normalize it. So when I'm booking initial meetings, and I usually do have staff book that for me, but the messaging is, hey, our first step is to have these individual intake meetings. It's really of no consequence who comes in first. It's more a matter of working with schedules. So what's the earliest time that you'll be available? And then we coordinate calendars and schedules and book a meeting from there. So after I've met with each of the primary individuals and their significant support person as a first set of meetings, then I'm likely going to want to meet with Abel and Betty separately to have their own meetings. Now, at this point, whether or not I have a meeting with Mom is going to depend a lot on what information I've gathered from these first 4 meetings. It may be that Mom is identified as somebody who does have her mental capacity and would be very comfortable and in fact would actually want to talk to me. Or it may be that Abel and Betty say, hey, look, Mom doesn't even know we're having these conversations, so do not contact her. And of course, in the joint sessions, we will need to explore that further to understand what their resistance is to involving Mom and help them think about how she actually fits right in the center of this picture. And this is how I am visualizing it, because if the dispute between Abel and Betty is all about Mom, she's the central figure. If they're on the same page about the fact that, Mom and her input, she just doesn't have that mental capacity to participate, then that will be something that is up to them. But if one thinks that Mom should participate and the other doesn't, then we need to have that interest-based discussion around uncovering what, is concerning to each of them, or what they're being motivated by in terms of having Mom involved or not involved, and then canvass those options. She's either involved or she's not involved, or we get her involved by utilizing a professional that can speak on her behalf, or what are all of the different ways in which we can actually get Mom's voice and her interests central to the discussion, just as in fact she's central to the discussion. So in this scenario here, I have decided, or I've collected information, and the parties have indicated that yes, it makes sense for me to have a meeting with Mom. And because Mom in this example is older and she's perhaps not very mobile, I will do what I can to really accommodate Mom to make this as easy of a process for her as possible. So I might ask if she's comfortable having me come to her home, obviously not during times of a pandemic where you're not to be going into people's homes, especially people who are vulnerable health-wise, or I might invite her to, if she's comfortable, to come to my office, if she's comfortable with technology. If she's not comfortable with technology, it might be an old-fashioned phone call. There are lots of different ways in which I make contact with Mom so that she gets to know who I am and can be comfortable with me and have her input in that way. Now, in this scenario, we also have set up a meeting for Dad, where Abel and Betty and Dad have a meeting, because somewhere along the lines here, it gets discussed that, Dad actually has an opinion in all of this as well. And maybe hasn't inserted himself in between this conflict, but he does have a perspective. And because he's part of this system, keeping in mind that you move any part of a system, it shifts other parts of the system. Whatever might end up happening with Mom is going to have an impact on Dad. So having a meeting with Dad may be very important. Now, it may be coming out of that meeting that another meeting is identified as being important, and that's where Abel and Betty and Mom, and for whatever reason, there may be some sort of dynamic here between Dad and Mom, and that might be personalities, it might be a power imbalance, it may be part of their pattern of communications where here in meeting number 6, Dad has actually, kind of identified the fact that though he thinks that this is an important conversation to be had, he's concerned about participating in this meeting where Mom might actually be surprised by Dad's opinion and perspective on this. And so he would just as soon not be part of this conversation. So here in meeting number 6, we're having the discussion that's really an interest-based discussion about how to design the process and the penultimate joint meeting that's going to happen between Abel and Betty, and turns out Mom is going to participate in this meeting as well, based on all the information that's been gathered here in these previous meetings. And then after this meeting has occurred and they have canvassed options on what they think that might be possible to resolve their dispute, it's then decided that the entire family is going to come to a meeting so that the proposed solution, or sorry, my phone ringing here in the background. The proposed course of action going forward, everybody has an opportunity to ask what questions that they might have, because of course, whatever ends up being decided between Abel and Betty and how that impacts Mom, impacts Dad, and potentially impacts Abel's wife and Betty's son. And so having a meeting with everybody, not necessarily to discuss the conflict between Abel and Betty, but in fact, it may be about discussing the outcome from that conflict so that the entire family can be part of the implementation, part of the solve phase. So you might take a look at this list of meetings and wonder to yourself, well, how long would this all take? How much would it cost this family? And I just want to point out that this is just an example. This is a hypothetical situation so that you can really think in a very broad way outside of how we often teach mediation and do role plays where there's just 2 people involved. And there's 2 people involved, we talk about having an individual meeting with each person and then having a series of joint meetings where it's a more extended family. There are lots of people involved. And of course, this could also be the case in a workplace scenario, for example, but where there are multiple parties, even if the conflict just presents as between 2 people, where there are multiple people involved, sometimes it's helpful to break it down into a series of littler meetings. You're still going to have your intake meetings, but then maybe there's a meeting with a couple of people or a few people, and then you're slowly bringing people together and you're building on the things that you're understanding and that the parties are understanding by those smaller meetings. Mediation is going to take as long as it's going to take. It may be that they have these meetings all in quick succession and they're very short meetings because everyone's just motivated. It may be because they're feeling some time pressure given Mom's needs. It could be because there's somebody's in town this weekend and they're not going to be next weekend. And so structuring the timeline will be driven by the party's needs and of course your availability. The cost to it is going to have a direct correlation to how long it takes unless you set up your business in such a way that you're offering perhaps a subscription or a flat fee service of some sort. So you're also going to be creating your retainer with the parties to determine not just who is going to be paying you, but on what basis that would be. Will it be hourly? Will it be as a package to say, well, given these people and the number of meetings that I'm anticipating you'll need, I'm willing to mediate from start to end with you for X amount, or to have this number of hours invested for this amount, and then we can reconnect to decide how far we got, or to look at how far we've gotten and what we think is still going to be needed. And just because this is laid out in such a way that suggests there's only one meeting per person and group of people, that's not necessarily how it would play out, because maybe you might need to meet with any number of these people more than once. And once you start having joint meetings, you might have caucuses with people separately. And even after the entire family has met, that may be where they identify that there are actually some other issues, some other topics, some other problems, other things that they have to sort through that kind of put you back into the rotation where you're identifying, well, who then needs to have some individual meetings and smaller joint meetings and work through this new issue, topic, problem. So once I have a handle on, who I'm going to meet with, and I have a series of meetings, I start to identify some of the underlying interests that are at play. And as I'm identifying them, and sometimes it's a hunch and I haven't had a chance to confirm it, and I'm just thinking, well, once we start having joint meetings, I'm going to check in as I'm listening and just confirm. So these might just simply be my working notes that I'm thinking about. Here are the things I'm picking up on that I think are important to the various different people that are part of this system. Now I'm checking, of course, these are just my hunches. I'm checking in with the folks throughout the whole mediation process. But coming out of the meetings and after I've explored further with them, and if ultimately it's determined that these are sort of the primary interests of various people in different configurations, I'll make these notes to myself. And I want to just point out how the different configurations can work. So when I meet with Abel and Annie, I discover that Abel, it's just part of his identity is just really feeling respected. And for Annie, she really needed to feel connected. But then when I meet with Abel separately, a primary interest that he has that's going to be connected to this interest he has up here, but comes through in a different way when I'm meeting with him one-on-one, so that he has an interest in feeling secure and having security in his outcome. That doesn't mean to say that he doesn't still also want to be respected. It's just that in the discussion and the dynamic between him and his wife, that is what ends up becoming the primary interest. So as you look through, and we will of course post this example on Slack so that you can take some time to review and digest it on your own, you can see that sometimes, depending on the configuration, or if somebody is on their own, the primary interests that they have really identified in that explore phase might be a little bit different, but there isn't going to be anything incongruent. And ultimately, when the entire family has come together, or perhaps even at meeting 7, if a goal statement was to be created that took into account these various different interests that have been identified through this series of separate meetings and joint meetings, this is an example of a goal statement that I might offer to this family. So, if autonomy is important and safety is important and overall peace of mind is for everyone is important, then let's go ahead and start discussing some options for providing care for mom. Now, you might be looking at this and thinking, well, seems a little bit different than how we normally do a goal statement, because it's not inserting anybody's name. And I use this as an example so that you remember that the format of the goal statement, the default format is there to give you an example so that you can try to plug in interest words. But the way in which you're ultimately going to create the goal statement will look different depending on the circumstances. In this example, what I have done is I've listened to everybody. I've had them confirm their various different interests. And what ultimately came out at the end was there were these primary interests. Autonomy was more important for mom than it was necessarily for anybody else. But that didn't mean to say that autonomy wasn't important to other people. That just was the most primary interest for mom. But I don't necessarily have to say, well, if autonomy is most important for you, mom, and as far as everybody else is concerned, they only care about safety. I mean, I'd never throw in the word only, but that would be what would be heard if I, in a multiple party type of mediation, am pointing out simply one person's interest when it's something that may be shared by multiple parties. And of course, as you get more and more people, you can imagine how convoluted and long and complicated your goal statement could be, that if every single person had a primary interest that was identified for them, would become very unwieldy to use that goal statement effectively to evaluate options. So you're trying to find some way to suss out, identify where there are at least some compatible interests that might be certain groups of people within the dispute, or one person has a particular interest that's compatible with the interest interests of the rest of the system, as in this example, because through the conversations becomes evident that safety is really what's driving this dispute. Everybody in the system, and in fact, including mom, she wants to be safe, but she's having some resistance because she values her autonomy. Now, at the end of the day, everyone's come to mediation and they're trying to work this out because they want to have some sort of a plan going forward that will give everybody peace of mind. And so we can then move into creating options about what the issue was identified, and that was providing care for mom, and figure out what would be all of the options that would still allow mom to have that autonomy and create safety for her and overall peace of mind for the whole family and the whole family system. And so that gave them something to be able to measure the options against. So I hope that this is helpful just as a way of kind of showing how you can meld your prepare phase and how it grows over time as you get to know people. But most importantly, that in this context where there are multiple participants, as is common in an estate and or elder dispute type of a mediation, that you will be creating your process and even coming up with a goal statement, for example, in a slightly different way than you do in less complex matters only involving a couple of people.